Hello, and welcome to Postmodern Iconoclast, a podcast where we break and destroy false idols and icons of the digital age in search of more authentic, esoteric spirituality. And in this episode, which is one of my solo episodes, I'm going to be talking about the idea of holy lands and really the broader idea of metaphysical place. So, in a recent video I made on my YouTube channel, not on the podcast, but on my channel, I talked extensively about metaphysical ages, like the Kali Yuga, the Age of Aquarius, all these ideas about time. And I feel like the thing that goes next to time and is an idea that must be discussed after discussing time is place. Because there is actually a lot going on in metaphysical place. Metaphysical place impacts us so much when it comes to how we do our rituals and how we grow as practitioners. So I thought it was worthy of having a podcast to itself because there is just so much going on with place. So I'm going to be talking about the idea of holy lands extensively in this podcast because I feel like that is an idea that people immediately associate with metaphysical place. I think pretty much everyone has heard of the idea of a holy land, but I have a very different perspective on holy lands as a perennialist, which I'll get into in a second. But I'll also talk about temples, land spirits, the nature of land, the nature of gods, all this stuff. So it's not just going to be a discussion about holy lands, but holy lands is going to make up a pretty large portion of this episode. But there's more that I think needs to be discussed. And I think the first thing about holy lands that everyone thinks of, especially now, especially considering current politics, as I'm recording this is April 26, 2024 on recording date. This isn't going to come out on that day. It's going to come out probably like 5-6 days later or so. But as of recording, unless something major has happened, the current thing is still going on. There's a big war in the Middle East about Israel and Palestine, and a lot of that does revolve around the idea of holy land. Of course, there is more going into it, but there is a major holy land component to that. Specifically, it's about the entire land of Israel, Palestine, but also about the city of Jerusalem slash Al-Quds, depending on what you want to call it. Um, and I think because of this, especially because this is so in the front of everyone's minds right now, people have this idea that there is one holy land, and this holy land is this city in the Levant, right? This is the only holy land. This is the holiest land in the world. But that's incorrect. There are actually many holy lands in the world. I would say this city definitely is one. I'm not denying that there's, things to Jerusalem. Obviously, there are things to Jerusalem. If so many religious miracles have happened in the same place, so many religious events have happened in the same place, there clearly is something to it. However, where I do take issue is the idea that this is the only holy land. And ironically, a lot of the Abrahamic religions agree with me that this is not the only holy land. So what I would say I should start here. What defines a holy land? What makes certain land holy and sacred? So I think holy lands can be defined by a few things. So in our brains, when we think of what is a holy land, the first thing our secular normal mind goes to is a place where things that defy the rules of rationality, things that defy the laws of nature, defy these things that we see as constants happen, right? Which also could be stated as a place where miracles, magic, all of these supernatural feats are common, places where these things go on regularly. And following that, a holy land is often a place where specific religious events or miracles happen, right? But I would say there's more to that because that defines sort of the conditions of things that happen in a holy land, but it doesn't define why a land is holy. And for that, I think we need to consider that all religions, when you get down to it, are cults of specific spirits, right? Every religion is centered around one god or another. And I would include figures like Jesus as a god because that is how they are defined in that religion. So you've got a cult around a god, and all of these cults have to originate somewhere. And where that cult originates is where that god first made himself known, made himself present, made himself as a force that exists. So any of these spots of Genesis are, I would say, already holy lands. But of course, there are more traditions and more gods out there than the Abrahamic ones. So that would mean that there are a lot of different holy lands all throughout the world, right? There are holy lands in many countries, holy lands in many places. There is not one singular holy land. All gods have a holy land somewhere, and depending on your metaphysical current, your holy land is actually going to be different. Of course, we can recognize in any holy land there is a metaphysical characteristic to it, but whatever is the holy land of our god, of our cult, is going to be the one that has the most metaphysical kick for us because we are already tuned into that god's metaphysical frequency. So when we experience a land where they are the most powerful, they are the most present, they are the most existing, it is going to be incredibly profound for us and is going to be, in a sense, the holiest land for us as individual spiritual practitioners. And so if you have a specific religious path, a god you worship, a belief set you hold, it can be incredibly beneficial to figure out, what are the holy lands of this god? Where is this god from? Where is this god most tethered? Because I can count on, actually, I can't count on my hands. I meant to say I can't count. So many stories of people who are pagan who have gone to the land of the gods they worship, of their patron god, and had these profound spiritual experiences that perhaps they would have had otherwise. But being in that special place, it just gives them something different. It gives them something even more powerful and profound. So Holy Land has value, right? I think some people get into this mindset where, well, I can do ritual everywhere. It's not like I can only do magical ritual in a Holy Land. So Holy Lands don't matter. Holy Lands don't exist. And that's not true, right? You can contact a god outside of their holy land. They're not literally like only existing in that holy land, right? They exist everywhere, but they are the most connected to that land, and so that land is going to be a place where their impact is the strongest, if that makes any sense. Like, if you're an American, right? If you're an American with a Nordic cultural or ethnic background and you worship, say, the gods of Ancestry, right? Obviously, America is not the holy land of the Aesir, right? Obviously not. But can you still do rune magic? Can you still invoke the Aesir? Of course you can. You can do that in America incredibly effectively. And that is because God's power is not like limited by their holy land. It's not like we have like a shock collar where, if they step outside that line, they get shocked. And it's like, oh, well, you can't do magic outside of the box because you're bound to the box. That's not how it works. These spirits do have sacred places to them. And I also want to mention that there can be multiple sacred lands within a religion. It's not like the sacred place is singularly, say, Stonehenge, right? There can be other rivers, other mountains, other places. So a god could have multiple kind of holy spaces. And that's where I think bringing up Islam is relevant, because in Islam there are obviously multiple holy lands that are well known to be multiple places, and they're within different national borders. So obviously there is Jerusalem. I'm sure we're all familiar with the many debates around Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is where Muhammad ascended into Jannah according to Islamic lore. And that's a super reputed place because it's the same place where the temple of the Jewish people were before it was destroyed. So probably the most contentious soil on earth, because you've got Muslims being really passionate over it because it was the land where their prophet ascended to Jannah. So of course they want to have a mosque there, right? It's the place where their prophet, united with their God. But at the same time, this is where the really important temple in Judaism was, the most important temple in the Jewish world, where there were all these really big sacrifices, these really big rituals, and after it was destroyed, basically all of Judaism changed forever, and basically Jews having prophesied that they will one day rebuild this temple, which obviously cannot happen without demolishing that mosque there. So, very disputed land, but we also know in Islam that Al-Aqsa Mosque is not the only holy land in the Islamic religion. It's actually not the holiest site, it's like the third. Above that, there is a specific place that I'm sure we've all seen pictures of called the Kaaba in Mecca, which is that black cube structure in Saudi Arabia that people take a pilgrimage to. You're obligated to take a pilgrimage to Mecca before you die if you're a Muslim. And what's so interesting about that is it immediately shows that a god can have multiple holy lands. There can be multiple holy sites in a religion. It's not like one singular coordinate set. There are multiple places. And the Kaaba is such an interesting one to me because the Kaaba, and this is going to get into a conversation we're going to have a little later in this episode, was not originally an Islamic temple. Of course, Muslim apologetics will argue against this, but even within Muslim apologetics, they understand that that temple was actually controlled by the pre-Islamic Arab pagans for a very long time. According to Islamic theology, the temple was built by Ibrahim, which is Abraham. Islam likes to slightly rename people. And then it was overtaken by the Arab pagans, the mushrikeen, as they will say, which mushrikeen as a term is a funny one because it just means polytheist or idolater, but it is used in a very weighted way. Very frequently, that term is thrown at Hindus in a very derogatory way, very aggressive way. I got in a big fight with this influencer, and I changed my my like second Instagram account where I post my outfit pics to Mushrik Darling. I thought this was funny. A lot of people did not find this funny because they said that's like a super loaded and offensive term. Whatever. I was doing it to be edgy and be transgressive against this creator, but you know, long story. But yeah, you can follow me on Instagram. Mushrik Darling. No, I think I changed it actually. I think it's different now. Um, Probably for the best that I changed it. It's Gnosis Darling. That's what it was. Took me a second to remember. Anyways, so you can see that these temples and these holy lands can be sacked by other religions. And as religions change, as the guards change on time and on aeons, you see a lot of sacking holy temples and building something else. I think also the Iota Hodada response, which I did a whole podcast on. Basically, there was this really important Hindu temple that was built. It's the Ram Mandir temple, which is the sacred site of Ram, which is one of the most important gods in Hinduism. This temple was destroyed, and there was a mosque built upon it. And this mosque was not special. It was not a holy mosque. I guess all mosques are holy mosques, but it was a less important holy mosque. And eventually what happened was, obviously India's politics have shifted, right? There was obviously Hindu control, and then the Mughals, which were a Muslim empire, took over. And now, of course, the Hindus control India now. And so they did actually demolish that mosque and rebuild the Ram Mandir temple. It actually just opened. And this land has been heavily disputed for a long time. I did a podcast on the subject, if you're curious about how that actually went down and the politics of it, because that became a very politicized issue. And some people will claim that this was a big power move from India, and then a lot of Indians will respond with they were given different land to build a mosque on, so not really a power play at all. They just wanted their holy land back. But, as time changes, holy lands become disputed, and people often, as a sign of metaphysical power, will want to build something on top of something that was previously sacred. There was a really, I found, gross thing going around on Twitter, but it does kind of exemplify this of when Christians took over parts of Europe, often they would, and this was not like always official church policy, like not all Christians were doing this, but enough were that it was notable, would cross out the faces of gods and goddesses with a giant cross carved over them, which is obviously horrific, evil, disgusting, truly disgusting behavior. Even outside of my own pagan proclivities, I think that it shows a blatant disregard for culture and, all the things that make Western civilization valuable, like our preservation of culture and history, right? I believe even if I get, let's say I get everything I want in my worldview, right? I still would not desecrate all the art of people I disagree with, or religions I disagree with, or ideologies I disagree with, because I think that art existing tells a lot about the past, says a lot to the story, and has a purpose. So I don't think we should be desecrating any art, hot take. But this was done as a power play. That's also why you'll often see Roman statues with the nose cut off. That was a very common desecration. And so when we think about holy lands, a big thing that religions will do is they will desecrate other religions' holy lands, build their own temples there, and use this as a sign of metaphysical superiority and of conquest. Now, that does not always mean that any relic found somewhere where their cult originally were not was that situation. No, there are many times where that's not what's going on. I think to Jordan, in Jordan, they were under a rule called the Nabateans, which were a pre-Islamic Arab empire, and the Nabateans and Rome interacted very, very heavily, very, very heavily, and their religions were syncretized in a lot of ways. Now, Rome did have a law that you cannot worship foreign gods, but when they're talking about territory that's outside of just Rome itself and kind of the outer expanses of the empire, instead of trying to like superimpose the Roman religion on everyone, what they would do is they would syncretize the Roman religion with the local pagan religion, because as pagans, we understand that other gods do exist. And so within Nabatean land, Jordan, there's just so many of them that I think Jordan's the easiest example, and Jordan is not currently riddled by war, so there's not mass destruction of antiquities and beautiful pieces of history. There are a number of like literal Roman structures, like Roman temples, Roman amphitheaters, all these things, and that was not a conquest in the same way desecrating a Hindu temple and building a mosque upon it is, right? That was showing a cooperation between the empires and them bringing their religion together. Specifically, Dushara, one of the most important gods in all of Arabia and the Levant, was syncretized with Zeus, and so on and so on. Basically, all of their gods have Greco-Roman equivalencies because of the relationship between these two empires. So keep that in mind. It is possible to, exist on a foreign holy land with your own gods and do that in a way that's not conquest, do that in a way that's cooperation. So not always bad when gods leave their native land and get given temples on foreign lands. That's not always, so destructive. That can turn out okay. Now, I do think it's important to talk about ancestry in this conversation, because ancestry is something that has a metaphysical nature and tendency to it. If you are a pagan like me, you will likely be engaging in some form of ancestor veneration. Now, I do want to clarify, ancestor veneration and worship are different things. Some people claim that ancestor worship is bad because you're worshiping things that are not gods. I do not consider ancestor veneration worship in that sense. Now, there are some people who do call it ancestor worship, or who worship gods that are essentially collective embodiments of their ancestors. The strongest example of this is in like voodoo and African traditional religions, where a lot of, I'm going to call them ATRs more forward, but that stands for African traditional religion. It's just a little easier to say. Within ATRs, there are these gods called the Loa, who are essentially collected ancestors all together until they kind of form through that collective of energy and existence a whole god presence. They are not the only culture that has this idea, but outside of gods who exist like this, most people, when they're talking about honoring their ancestors, connected to their ancestors, they're talking about something that falls more into the veneration camp, which is kind of just reverence, leaving offerings, right? Like you're leaving offerings to your ancestors, you're revering them, you might be calling upon them for protection, but you're not interacting with them in the same way you would a god, right? Like it's a different vibe, it's a different dynamic, because they're not gods. They don't have the same level of power of the gods. And we honor our ancestry, we honor the gods for very different reasons. But often, our ancestry has a metaphysical component to it, and it does affect our metaphysical body of light. And, the traditions that we are drawn towards in our ancestry are often very linked. And so one way to understand holy lands that might be sacred to you is to look at your ancestry and think about the gods that correlate to that ancestry, and then contact those gods, connect to those gods, and perhaps even make a pilgrimage to that place. That's a very easy rule of thumb to have some good spiritual connection and understand these things. Because ancestry, it's permanent. It's something that will always be there, something that will be there from the moment you were created to the moment you die. And so ancestry has a lot of value and should be considered in these conversations extensively. Now, in the modern world, most people are not really living. I mean, not most people, but a lot of people are not living where their ancestors lived, where the original cult of their ancestral gods live, right? A lot of people live in completely different places, completely different worlds, completely, like it's just night and day where people actually live now. So, I want to talk about, as an American, I think I really can have this conversation being in a foreign place, right? So I'm an American. My family's been in America for generations and generations, an incredibly long time. But obviously, my original ancestry is not like indigenous American. Obviously, I think you can tell that by listening to me and looking at me, but if you did not know, I'm an Appalachian. I'm originally from Appalachia, which means that my ancestors would be considered Ulster Scots, which is a Scotch Irish group, right? That is my direct ancestry. So, if I were to, you know, get into ancestral veneration, that's where I would look. But I also need to consider I'm not in the place where my ancestors lived for most of history, right? And for that reason, I am existing in a foreign land. And that means that if I were to make a pilgrimage, it would have value. So pilgrimage is something I should consider. But also, while in this land, understand that my ancestors can still reach here. They are not blocked by here. It's not like you have to be in your ancestral land to connect to your ancestors, but just, there's an awareness of that. It's going to be a little different. Your approach is going to be a little different than living inherently in a holy land, because you're living in a less holy land to your metaphysical body and to your metaphysical practice. So things get a little bit more complicated, but you can still have all of these profound and beautiful connections. So, the next thing I wanted to talk about is the role of temples. So, temples are a way of creating a holy land instantly. And temples do not have to be massive structures. So, obviously, when we think of temple, we think of really huge, elaborate complexes that are built for the sole purpose of esotericism, right? We think of the Parthenon, we think of Stonehenge, we think of all of these things. And a lot of us think of these neo pagan projects that have been building their own temples. There's a lot of them in Europe where people have been creating whole temples. There was a temple to Apollo that was built, and these temples are used by these pagan cults to honor their gods. As well, there are, different organizations like the OTO or, the Wiccan groups that have made their own temples. And these temples are not publicly accessible, right? They're not like you can like walk down the street and just go into them, but they do exist. And they are used as places for their ritual, right? Temples are important for this reason. And I think really the main power of a temple and the main thing that makes a temple matter is its consecration and the fact that it is a space devoted to the divine. Obviously, in temples, other things happen, right? Like classes, lectures, a little brunch or potluck after a big initiatory ritual. Obviously, other things go on, but the temple is generally devoted to the gods and devoted to something significant with the gods, that it is inherently a place of worship. Now, I think something that comes up is temple building. As people interested in mysticism, temple building is something that if we can take under our belts is such an incredible gift of sacrifice, of offering, and of effort. And so you may go, whoa, 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 but I can't by myself. Like, I don't know how to build things. I don't know how to, like, chop up wood or whatever. And it doesn't need to be that complicated. You can make a temple in your own home or even your own apartment. I mean, part of the reason why we make altars is altars to be a dedicated sacred space to our spirits, to our gods in our broader home. So even an altar is a kind of mini temple. Now, if you have a home with multiple rooms, like a bigger house, right? you can dedicate a whole room as your temple room and just make that room devoted to esotericism only. Like, just have a dedicated sacred space within your home that exists as the metaphysics place. I also seen people do this with sheds in their yard. Like, if you're someone with a big yard, like getting some shed from Lowe's and then, taking that shed and painting on the walls, setting up altars, setting up everything you need to do your ritual, and making that like your personal ritual shed. I think that's super, super cool. But it can be simpler than that. You can, if you live near the woods, have a particular clearing in the woods where maybe you carve some sigils into trees and set up rocks and logs in a specific way that, you have your cardinal directions marked out, and that's a place you go to do your rituals, right? That is a temple too. Temples can exist in nature. They don't all have to exist in this same way. As well, when you are actually doing a ritual, if you begin with a ritual like the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, which lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram is of course a banishing ritual, but it serves a dual purpose. It is able to mark a space as your microcosm in which the macrocosm will then be impacted, right? It draws out a space as this is my space where I am doing this ritual, and this ritual will be affecting the larger world and the larger universe, right? That is kind of a temple. It's stretching the definition a bit, but there is still a metaphysical nature to it. It is still a space devoted to ritual, devoted to something higher. And so, in a sense, we are always temple making whenever we do ritual, whenever we create these things. We are building a world, building a temple, building all these things up in order to make something great with our energies, with our lives, and with our world around us. Now, the next thing I want to discuss is non-physical temples. Like, this includes things that aren't even made with like lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, or specific like ceremonial magic techniques. I mean, like literally, like it does not physically exist, and by that I mean also like energetically through those lines exist. It exists by being constructed in a different way. Because when you're constructing energetic lines through an LBOP, you are constructing it with your voice and with your movement. It is still constructed through physical methods. But if we were talking about constructing an energetic temple that has that energetic existence and that energetic component without using, our physical bodies to do so, that is still a metaphysical temple and still is in existence, but it is a lot more complicated, and I find a lot of people find that a lot less effective and a lot less potent. So I want to talk about astral temples. So the astral plane is a metaphysical plane beyond our physical existence. So we are rooted in Malkut, which is the material world, the physical world. But when we dream, or we close our eyes and visualize, or we go into deep trance, or we astral project, we enter Yasod, which is the sphere right above the material plane. It's the sphere of the moon, and it is the astral plane. These are the same thing. So you can, if you are unable to do anything in your physical space, or if you're injured, I really recommend this to anyone who is on bed rest. Like, let's say you just got in a car crash and you're severely injured, but you still want to connect to the gods. You think the gods might even be able to help you with your situation. In this case, I would recommend doing rituals in the astral. So this is a pretty advanced technique, honestly, but it is something that does work. So you'll close your eyes. I like to enter astral projection by making my body as still as possible, and just focusing on that stillness. And I like to listen to all the little minute, small sounds in my room, right? Like the hum of the AC, the noise in the hallway from the other people who live in your apartment complex, all those like little things until you're incredibly present in the moment and your body is locked. In a sense, when you're astral projecting, you are actually in sleep paralysis. So, sleep paralysis is such a complicated metaphysical subject. I don't even know where to begin with it, because if you are involuntarily in sleep paralysis, you are often being metaphysically attacked. Because when you're in sleep paralysis, your body is less rooted to your spirit, which is why astral travel occurs in sleep paralysis. And so, from an astral travel perspective, we do this level of stillness and focus in order to induce voluntarily sleep paralysis. However, sleep paralysis that is not purposely brought upon and brought upon with intention is often really bad. So just keep that in mind. I have experienced both. I have experienced voluntary sleep paralysis through astral projection. Astral projection is actually one of the first metaphysical skills I learned because it just inherently fascinated me. And I've had instances of spiritual attacks through sleep paralysis. I remember it was the night after I graduated high school. I was in a hotel room bed and I experienced sleep paralysis involuntarily. And I remember I don't know if I literally opened my eyes, but I felt like I was opening my eyes and I could see the hotel room, but I couldn't move. And it was very, very scary. But sleep paralysis for astral projection is not that. It doesn't even really feel like sleep paralysis, but that is physically, like if a doctor were to look at you, what is going on. But when you are in a state of astral projection, you'll notice once you've reached this state of stillness, once you've induced paralysis, you'll feel yourself begin to vibrate. It's this very energetic vibration. I feel like my whole body is like in a blender or something. And then from there, you'll visualize your body of light, your soul leaving your body. Now, for me, I do this limb by limb. I start with my finger. I start with my, you get what I'm saying? Like I slowly pull out. And this process takes a while. It's not quick. But once you have left your body, you can perform the ritual with your body of light because you do have complete control over it without moving your physical body. So your physical body is kind of just in this limp state process while your energetic body is doing all these rituals. You can do just as much magic in the astral plane as you can in the physical plane. So that is an option, and that is creating a astral temple in which things can be done. So yeah. Now, some people do a thing where instead of astral projection, they just visualize things. And that can have value to it too. It's not going to be as profound as astral projection, so it's a much more mild way to do it, but that, that has value to it too. So just keep that in mind that that's a thing. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about techno-mysticism. I don't talk about techno-mysticism a lot because, first of all, I'm not very good with technology. Second of all, I'm not a techno-mystic, and I don't have a lot of interest in it. I think techno-mysticism, there's so much like weird transhumanism, and I do think transhumanism is metaphysically evil in a lot of ways. Stuff attached to it, and just tech bro cringe. I don't like the Silicon Valley thing. It's not my vibe. Sorry if you work in the tech sector here. I'm a little terrified of technology. I've talked about how technology advancing freaks me out on shows before, on this show before. I'm a little scared of tech developing because I feel like tech is being developed in a way that is not being developed for positive human life. I feel like tech, if it's not developed for the bettering of human life, it's probably just going to make us suffer. And I think a lot of people are advancing and making progress for the sake of progress instead of making progress for some sort of reason that actually makes our lives better. I think so much of this tech really honestly is doing the opposite and is doing nothing but hurting us. But there are people doing cool things with technology. Not all technology is bad. I feel conflicted. I'm scared of it, but I think it has some utilities. Like obviously, if we could develop tech to cure cancer or something, I would support that. I'm not too off my rocker. Maybe a little, but not that far. And anyway, some people are using technology, and that could be coding, artificial intelligence, virtual reality. I know there's a whole thing called like VR Mystery School, where someone in virtual reality like created, I think it's a Golden Dawn temple. I haven't used it myself, but I do know it exists. Where people are like doing rituals through virtual reality and building temples that obviously they don't have the budget to build or the practicality to build through virtual reality. I've seen people building temples in like Minecraft before, all this stuff. I think that is nowhere near as powerful as a real temple, and I don't think it's possible to do proper initiation through these things. But I think it's cool, and I think maybe one day when tech gets better, that might be able to happen. Right now, I'm just a little skeptical. There are also people kind of building, in a sense, a virtual, I don't know if virtual temple is the right word, but a virtual community through Zoom. So during like the pandemic thing, we were all stuck inside, we were all locked down. A lot of people were doing Zoom rituals, and I actually led some myself, where basically someone would be a main ritualist and they would read out the invocations, they would do the banishing rituals in their like Zoom window, and then everyone else in Zoom would watch along and then follow along when it was parts where everyone needed to work together. And I found that was an interesting experience because I definitely felt something. I think there is still, those still work, but what I noticed is whenever you're a group ritual in general, the group ritual operates off the energy of everyone in that space. And so if there's someone who's dead weight, who's just like watching and not really participating, like let's say you're doing a rune circle and you're all, doing Galder with the rune and you're, singing out the rune. But there's one person who isn't participating who's like, oh, I just want to watch. Like that person is metaphysical dead weight. They are going to weigh you down. And so I feel like with Zoom, rituals and video conferencing rituals. 'Cause there were chaos magicians doing video conferencing rituals way before COVID. There's a really funny photo. I wonder if it's still on Wikipedia, but it was on the Chaos Magic Wikipedia for so long, of these like people in black coats sitting around a computer, and the caption was, "A chaos magician does occult rituals through video conferencing," and it's the funniest little picture. It's got to be from like 2008 or 2009, probably on Skype. And it's such a funny picture to me. I love that picture. It cracks me up. But kind of that. There are people doing stuff like that still, and I think it's not the same as an in-person ritual, but it's certainly better than nothing. It's just got some issues with it. I think maybe one day that could be hammered out, or if you had like a pre-established coven or a group of people you knew were really devoted and trying, like maybe the Zoom ritual could work a little better than some of the Zoom rituals that I was part of. But you know, it's better than nothing, and I think for people during COVID, it was very, very helpful. So, going back to Holy Lands, I wanted to talk about, the nature of empire and, like, empire growth, conquest, all of these ideas, because I think it is very relevant to this conversation. Obviously, there are no pagan conquests right now, but other religions are doing their own conquest, and I think humanity really likes conquest. I don't think that that, as an idea and as a concept, is going away. I think war looks very different now, but people still are sacking land. It still happens. So, as an empire grows, does their holy land grow? Is, I think, the question that underlies empires from a pagan perspective, right? Because we know that the ancient pagans had a lot of empires. There were a lot of them. There was a lot of war. I mean, there were intertribal wars. Like, originally, the Arab pagan pantheon was not one pantheon. It was North Arabia and South Arabia. And they had very different pantheons. They were very much at war with each other. And a lot of the old inscriptions and prayers are about trying to get the other side. And then eventually, I mean, the Arab Peninsula was not fully united until under Muhammad, but prior to that, there were alliances made, there were all sorts of things, and there were empires in that region of the world. So, as an empire grows, does their holy land grow? And I would say, so an empire and a nation in general is a metaphysical body, right? And the reason why I believe they are a metaphysical body is because you can do spells against countries. There are people who've done this, and you can get astrological metrics for a country. So, if I were to type in the day and the time and the place where America was born, I could get a chart based on America and do predictive astrology utilizing the chart of America, right? And there are people who do this. There's people whose entire thing is basically like geopolitical national astrology, and they get really profound results back. They see things moving, they see things shifting. So, obviously there is something to that, these are bodies that we are bound from, and as well they have their own ideals and values and all these things that kind of do have a metaphysical nature to them, because obviously virtue is a metaphysical thing, and every nation has their own virtues, their own qualities, all this stuff. So I think nations are metaphysical bodies, and so obviously as a country expands and invades places, it conquests, it does war, so does that metaphysical body. But I think whatever gods that this empire is tied to, because some empires have been holy empires that were tied to specific gods, and those gods would obviously have a main holy land. Um, no, the holy land of the empire would not expand, but the metaphysical body of the empire would get bigger and stronger, kind of like an egregore. Like an egregore is a chaos magic concept that, and nations do have egregores to them. Egregores are a big part of like this idea. You can argue that a nation is more than just an egregore, but at the very least, a nation is an egregore. That's like the minimum qualification it reaches metaphysically. I think it reaches a higher qualification in most cases. But an egregore is basically enough thoughts have been sent through something that it has a metaphysical quality to it, and eventually it reaches a state of autonomy and exists as a spirit in its own right. Which I agree with. I agree that this happens. And with egregores, as they get bigger and bigger, as more and more thoughts and energies are put into them, they feed, right? They get bigger and bigger, they grow, and they feed. It's like they're hungry and they want to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I think that's a better way to explain empires than like, the whole land of an empire is a holy land. Like that's not quite correct. They still will have a rooted holy land that they have to return back to through pilgrimage and through metaphysical points. You'll notice if you've ever done an initiation, like a traditional initiation, they'll often have names of cities. in the initiation text. There are many traditions that do this. This is not like a singular tradition thing. And that's rooting something back to that Holy Land and remembering and referencing that Genesis. So I wanted to talk about the nature of pilgrimage and the value of pilgrimage. So, pilgrimage is the thing that happens metaphysically where you travel to a holy land in order to have a spiritual experience. Pretty much every religion has some form of pilgrimage. For some religions, like Islam, it is obviously required. For other ones, it is recommended. I mean, if you are, say, a Catholic, you probably will make a pilgrimage to the Vatican or to the space where, your particular patron saint exists, right? There's a lot of different pilgrimages that Catholics can do. There's like a ton of them. And these people, when they go to these places, they want to take something back from it. They'll want to take back soil or a rosary or water or anything because they know that that space is metaphysically marked and has a metaphysical quality to it. And that is same with paganism. Pilgrimage is really, really valuable. And when we travel, there is metaphysics to travel, right? Travel is obviously ruled by Mercury. So when you're traveling, it can be, recommended to leave offerings to Mercury to ensure swift and easy travel. But obviously, in every place, there are foreign spirits there. Within any place, there's a number of spirits there. There are the local gods, the gods of this place, the gods whose cults originate by here. This is the main big guy of a holy place. But there are also land spirits because to the land, there is a spiritual nature. Animism is correct. My beef with animism is I think animism is an oversimplification of way more complicated metaphysics, right? There is a spiritual quality to nature and to everything around us, but there is more going on too. It's not just animism. I use the term grug animism, a very serious philosophical term. No, it's not a serious philosophical term, but I think it sums up well to refer to like the animism of like your base logic, like, oh, rock is special, rock is spirit, I worship rock, right? That is grug animism. Grug animism is there is power here. And the grug animists are not wrong. Like, grug animism is just a reductionist form of more complicated metaphysics. The grugs are not as far off as you think they are. I am pro grug animism. It's just an oversimplification. And it's kind of a more primitive understanding of more complicated metaphysical ideas. But the funny thing about metaphysics is often metaphysics are a really complicated way to explain a very simple concept, and animism is the simple concept explanation for this bigger concept. And so as people who are serious about this stuff, like, we should strive to understand the bigger concept, the more complicated explanation of these things. But the simple explanation still has value to it too. And so there are spirits in the land. When you look at a big waterfall, there is a spirit to that. Different cultures and different regions have different names for land spirits, but land spirits are a pretty universal concept as well. There are ideas like house spirits, like whatever house you're in has a house spirit to it that you can develop a relationship with to make your house go a little smoother. But when you're traveling, you're obviously interacting with new land spirits, new spiritual energies. Every time you're in a new place, new energy is there. So it can be really helpful to leave out a simple offering to the spirits of the place, the gods of the place. When I travel, I often will leave out a little bit of water, like something super simple, not a fancy offering, not anything complicated, and say, I leave this as an offering for the spirits of the place, the gods of this place, so that you welcome me onto this land and bless me while I'm here, right? Just to kind of ensure a smooth time there. Because obviously those spirits see you, they know you're there, they know you're in their space, and so making peace with them can be really, really valuable. At the end of the day, ideas like a nature-based religion are not wrong. Like, there is a spiritual value to nature, and as pagans, we should understand this, and we should care about nature. We should take care of the world around us and love the world around us and see the beauty in the world around us and the spiritual beauty in it. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is destruction. So, what happens when you destroy a holy land, typically in the framework of war, and put your own stuff there? We see this most extreme with the Kaaba, right? The Kaaba was a pre-Islamic Arab temple. There were, I don't even know how many idols in there. There were a lot. And obviously all those idols were destroyed. The Kaaba was, Kaaba's been recarpeted a bunch of different times, but it was reworked in how it looks. And a new pilgrimage ritual was put there. And the Kaaba, I'm using as the most extreme example because they didn't even knock down the Kaaba. They kept the Kaaba up. They kept the black stone in the Kaaba. In other examples, you see things knocked down, like the Ram Mandir temple was obviously knocked down by the Mughals, and they built a mosque there in its place. As well, you see, examples like the Hagia Sophia. Obviously, that was a Orthodox church that they kind of scratched out the images of Jesus and painted up some Islamic imagery, and then it's a mosque. I'm using a lot of Islamic examples because they're just the ones that I think people are most familiar with, but other religions have done this too. Obviously, the Ram Mandir temple, they knocked back over that mosque and put the new Ram Mandir temple on top of it, right? So, as this happens, does it eradicate the power of the previous religion in that space? Does knocking something over get rid of it? And I think to understand this, we need to turn back our clocks a little bit. So when Abrahamicism spread, there was a lot of devastation. There were a lot of statues that were cut up, their nose chopped off, beheaded, all of these things. And you still see this today. Like the Taliban blew up these Buddha statues in Afghanistan that were very, very important. When the ISIS, the terrorist group ISIS, took over Syria, they actually desecrated pagan statues that no one had been worshiping for like an incredibly long amount of time that were sitting in a museum. They desecrated them anyways, just because they were worried, oh, scary statue. People are going to become pagan when they see scary statue. And thankfully, since ISIS has been kicked out of that country, a lot of rebuilding has gone into those statues. Under the current Assad regime, they have put effort into rebuilding these things and putting them back into the Museum of Damascus, which is good. So people do rebuild things, but does it physically, like on a metaphysical level, destroy the thing? Or the people really on Twitter who are edgy Christians love Saint Boniface, who knocked over this really important tree to the pagans of that area. Like, does it kill the gods? No. This is stupid. Hurting a statue does not kill the god attached to it. This is like Grug logic once again. Like, oh, if I destroy the image of something, the thing gets destroyed. We as pagans understand that the gods are not literally the statue, right? I think most of us understand that. And so by hurting a statue, you don't hurt the gods. You basically just assert superiority and assert like your supremacy of yourself. It's not actually going to kill the gods in any meaningful way. The gods still exist. You could destroy every single image of a god and the gods still exist. And we see this the most in Islam, where you cannot make images of Allah. Of course, they make calligraphy of Allah's name, which is, I would say, an idol of Allah. Whatever, but they don't make physical statues. Clearly, Allah still exists, even though there are not physical statues. And that actually uses an argument for that religion being true, because there's not statues, but a god exists with or without statues. You don't need statues. You could go and honor a god and invoke a god with absolutely no visual representation to them in existence. And I know people who worship gods who we literally don't even have like a single relic of what they looked like. We just know the name and their myths, and that's enough. So no, they're not tethered to things in these ways. It doesn't work. It's kind of more something that affects the psychology of humans than the metaphysical quality of the gods. Now, the last thing I want to talk about in this subject is a bit of a direction change, but I think it is relevant when it comes to the metaphysics of place, and that is astrocartography. So astrology is a law. Astrology exists. Astrology is real. Astrology is objectively true, and astrology is something we can understand to understand the wholeness of the world. And astrology also relates to place. Every person has this thing, and it's called astrocartography. And cartography means the study of maps. So what you can do is with someone's birth data, you can calculate the astrocartography of the world for them, which basically divides the world up on these lines with all these planetary lines, some moving up and down, some moving across through it, and there will be lines of the sun, of Jupiter, of Venus, of Mercury, of all these things. And when you are in places that are on or close to these lines, like let's say you're near a Mercury line, in that place you have more mercurial stuff in your life. So if you want to be a writer, go to a place that's a Mercury line for you. Or if you move near one of your Mars lines, we'll see a lot of passion and growth, but a lot of conflict, a lot of anger, a lot of internal distress. And so astrocartography is a whole metaphysical science to it that's really, really potent and powerful. There are people who do readings for it, but you can just look at it yourself and play with it. It's pretty straightforward, right? Whatever line you're near or on relates to that thing and what it rules. So you can even look and see like what the place you live in is. Maybe it'll make sense. Maybe you're having a lot of depression and you realize you're living on a Saturn line. And so a lot of people who understand astrocartography will travel to and move to places that are on favorable lines for them. Like if they're struggling in their career, they'll move to something on a Jupiter line, and so on and so on. So astrocartography is a super cool and useful tool. It's another way to use astrology besides predictive natal astrology, because predictive natal astrology is only like a one tiny portion of what astrology is. So through astrocartography, you can understand a lot more about, all the complexities of astrology and all the other ways astrology can be used to benefit our lives. And so with that, that's the final thing I want to say about the metaphysics of place. And holy lands. So, land is metaphysical. Land has a metaphysical quality to it. And I hope this podcast gives you some understanding into the nature of place, land, and where you are. And so, with that, this has been your host, Georgina Rose, or Dot Darling. Please come with me to India. We can go on a pilgrimage together. I'm hosting a trip with Trova Trip where we're going as a group. It's going to be super, super cool. I also am on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, X, YouTube, Substack, Threads, Telegram under Dot Darling, DAAT Darling. I'm really on every platform. I might have even forgotten one. I'm everywhere. And this podcast is on the Dot Darling YouTube channel and on most podcasting platforms under the Postmodern Iconoclast. So if you're on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe. And if you're on a podcasting platform, please give us a review. It genuinely makes a difference. Maybe don't leave a bad review. Leave a nice one. If you have a bad review, then don't leave a review. But anyways, this show is supported through Patreon. So if you like the show and you want more of it, I release a pre-show, which is a bonus mini episode for patrons only with every single episode of this show. I also release every Neo-Pagan Sabbath a bonus episode, so that's 8 bonus episodes a year. One of those I'm not sure if this episode will come up before or after that, but I'm releasing a Beltane episode on the 1st of May. So if you're listening to this before, there's about to be one, and if you're listening after, you can join the Patreon and listen now. So yeah, that's all I have to say. I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a nice day, afternoon, mid-morning, whatever time it is, wherever you are.